I think we're in our 99th year, and not quite as long running the youth sale with that, but I appreciate everybody showing up. When I left to go back to the motel, it was like, wow, there's not very many people here, so I'm glad we've got a little better crowd. We've got some people online too. We have some requests from some of the local leadership around the U.S. To put this online, and so I've been wanting to do this program for about 3 or 4 years now to get these minds up here on stage and actually get them recorded and for future generations to kind of watch to see how the revitalization of the American wool clothing industry started. And a lot of it did start right up here, so taking a hard look at that. I would like everybody to indulge me. 23 years ago, I was sitting on Main Street downtown here in Miles City in town for the Ram sale, and there was kind of a rumor going around that a plane had run into a building in New York City. If you would just give us a moment of silence for all the men and women that died in that, and the servicemen and women that served our country so valiantly in the years that followed. And just give them a minute of silence and reflect on how that event changed our lives here. Thank you guys for that. It's important to remember that always, because it did have a big impact on our lives, and it's going to continue to have a big impact on them. So my name is Brent Roeder. I'm the Montana State University Sheep and Wool Extension Specialist. If you don't know me, I work for Extension, but I'm housed in the Department of Animal and Range Sciences on our campus at Bozeman. So if you have any major issues with me, one of my bosses is sitting right over there, Dr. Carl Leone, our department head, a fantastic department head for Animal and Range Sciences and a big supporter of animal agriculture. So it's always nice to see Dr. Leone show up on stuff. You probably came to listen to me give my 3-week experiences on Australia and what we kind of learned down there. I'm gonna try and keep it brief because the beaver kids have told me that I can be very long-winded. So we're going to try and keep it pretty brief. I'll make some general comments. I do have to write up a fairly large report on it, but some of the major differences you're going to see over there, if you do go over, obviously they drive on the wrong side of the road. If you do rent a car, you want to get a GPS mapping system for that car, because we're going to need it to be able to stay on the right side of the road. And when you get into a roundy and you start trying to make left-hand turns and right-hand turns, it's obviously a little different. There's no plastic, hardly anything. No plastic bags, no plastic silverware, no plastic plates, no plastic cups. It's all recyclable materials. Probably the hardest thing for me is there's nothing but instant coffee. That got really tough for a while, so don't be scared of the 16-hour flight going. You're going to spend almost 30 hours in multiple airports getting there. Actually, the 16-hour direct flight from LAX to Melbourne was probably the most enjoyable part of that trip. There, I got to do 2 full books during that flight, so that was good. From the sheep standpoint, a lot of similarities. Their producers are just like producers in this room. Well, they complain about the weather, they complain about the government, they want, Scott back there giving me the big thumbs up, so, but they just want to see their kids grow up, well-educated, safe, and take over the family business. So their production systems are a lot different. They export 98% of their wool clip to mostly China. They export 60% of their lamb production, so they're very export driven. Most of the sheep are raised in a very small area, basically in the south. Most of them are in the southeast corner of Australia, and a few of them in the southwest corner of Australia. Fairly high rainfall zone, very long growing season. Every producer we sat down at the table with and had coffee, they talk about climate change a lot. And they're starting to see it some in the southwest part. Where rainfall's dropped about 6 inches a year on average over the last 10 years. It looks like it's maybe going to stay there. So I said, yeah, we deal with climate change too in Montana. Our climate went from negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit this winter to over 100 in the summer. We have a 90-day growing season in a lot of this country, and we grow most of our usable forage within 45 days. And then, you know, you have red fox that take about 4% of your land crop and some dingoes up in the more outback areas. But I said, you know, we have coyotes, we have mountain lions, we have black bear, we have grizzly bear, we have wolves, we have fox too, and everything else, and eagles. They can't comprehend those type of challenges to a production system. So it was very enlightening for them. I think one of the takeaways, though, is one thing that I didn't fully realize was they are really still stuck on wool production. A lot of we call them traditional merinos, in their shearing 16 to 20 pounds of wool per year. A lot of them are double shearing. And so you look at that, but their wool market's a little better than our wool market. Obviously, they're a lot closer to China and have a better trade agreement with them. But what was interesting was when you put it on a per acre basis, where we run 8 to 9 to 10 acres per sheep, they run 2 acres per sheep. Almost year round, they do graze a lot of stubble in the summer. That's kind of their dry part of the year. So if you have a ewe that's producing $75 worth of wool, it's not unreasonable down there right now. You know, you're talking $37 an acre just in wool. And so their lamb production is they wean everything in about 60 days, and wean a lot of 50-pound lambs. And they try and get them off as quick as they can because the ewes are going out on canola or winter wheat stubble. And they're really dry right now, so there's going to be about 30 million 50-pound lambs hitting the market here pretty quick that they're going to have to figure out what to do with. Their heavy lamb market, obviously they export a lot of lamb to the United States. That heavy market, they're getting about $1.30 a pound for those heavy harvest-ready lambs. 3 months ago, they were getting $35 Australian for a 50-pound lamb. So they see that market swing too on the lamb side. It's just not us. But they are developing what they call a sustainable merino, or a new type of merino that honestly looks almost identical to our northern Gamma RD. They're anywhere from, you know, as low as 120% lamb drop up to some of the producers on the mature ewes are up to 180% drop now. Pasture lamb and paddocks, they ultrasound everything, early, late, multiple twin. And they'll put about 60 twin bear ewes in a pasture for about 3 weeks. The main driver that's difficult to hard to talk about is how much progress they've made in selection in the last 10 years using genomics. We've all been to meetings or read about genomics, and it sounds a bit like a pie in the sky deal. But they've spent over the last 15 or so years, I think one producer told me the industry as a whole has spent $250 million on just developing a genomic program for merinos. And that's allowed them to select for stuff like muscle tenderness, eating quality, intermuscular fat. They're working right now on mothering ability with their ewes, and so they've definitely invested a lot of money into that system that has allowed them to make an enormous amount of progress in about 10 years, the last 10 years especially. So that was my quick update. Hopefully, Carl, I didn't say anything that was offensive. But the real reason we're here today, and the real reason everybody showed up, like I said, I've been wanting to do this for quite a while. Right next to me, I have Mr. Ben Hostetler from Buffalo, Wyoming, Mountain Meadow Wool Mill, engineer by training. I'm doing this kind of off the top of my head because, yeah, I know some of these guys pretty well. taken a very different look at how to process wool, especially on the scouring side. Uses engineering training to develop a self-sustaining scouring process, because as most of you know, if you've done any work that involves the EPA, the regulations to discharge any type of water are pretty serious. And so I've been down to Ben's operation multiple times, runs a very nice, recently expanded, so it looks like things are doing fairly well. So but we appreciate you being here, Ben. Mr. Evan Helle over here in the middle from the Duckworth Wool Company. Dad John is here, a couple other people. So you guys started that business how long ago? And 10 years, yeah. And make a whole range of different products. Where Ben is probably mostly custom. We're making products for other people, scouring their wool, 100% source verified, keep them, if I bring wool in, take it to you, have it processed, I know I'm getting my wool back. If you've never sent your wool off to have blankets made somewhere around the world, you'll find out pretty quick. They'll tell you you're getting your wool back, but a lot of times you're getting part of your wool back because they're blending it with a bigger lot. Ben does a good job with that, but Evan and the Duckworth Wool Company, Evan, you kind of manage more of the logistics side. I mean, you're on the ranch, you're helping with the day-to-day operation of the ranch and managing the sheep and the shearing, and then you kind of, I guess your forte within the business is managing the logistics of getting the wool to the mill, getting it scoured, getting it cleaned, spun, dealing with the multiple companies that you guys deal with in multiple states, to just working on the logistics side. So it'll be interesting to hear about you, those thoughts that you've had. So down on my far left, Mr. Wade Kopren of the Fish-Hook Sock Company. A lot of you know Wade from multiple years running multiple shearing crews all over the West. So Wade grew up on a fairly extensive ranch in western South Dakota. And, you know, like a lot of these operations, multi-generation, and just wanted to try and expand their business. And he saw a niche and took a leap of faith and started producing his own socks with the Fish-Hook Sock Company. And how long ago was that, Wade? Seven years ago you started down that? Yeah, and business has been pretty good. And we're just at the Sturgis rally I saw, and the one claim to fame that I know you have with your socks is the governor of South Dakota wears your socks at least once a week. So that's always good. And with that, I think I'm just going to start into the questions. Most of this group knows the environmental benefits of wool. Sustainable, it's renewable. We've been doing this for 10,000 years. We've been raising sheep, getting on not only the milk and the meat, but we harvest that wool every year, and then we take it and we make clothing out of it. And I think at some point people are going to come to the realization, maybe not this generation, but maybe the next generation. We're currently importing about 8.5 billion pounds of synthetic fabric per year into the United States. So we're importing 25.5 pounds of synthetic fabric per person in the United States. A lot of that synthetic fabric is going to be around for 400 years, getting into our water system. So probably in the next 10 years, you're going to start hearing a lot of talk. The global warming talk is really overpowering the microplastic contamination of our freshwater systems, but you're going to start hearing more and more about that in the next 10 years. So we just kind of wanted to do a roundtable discussion with this. Everybody's tired of PowerPoints and stuff like that. So we're going to imagine we got a little fire out here and everybody's got some refreshments to sip on. And we're going to talk about the business part. What are the opportunities and challenges of producing fabric in the United States currently? And so I did get some questions from wool industry people around the U.S. And so we're just going to start off. I've got about 19 of them, and we're going to watch our time. We're already ahead of schedule, so Corey, you should be happy with that. I stopped speaking. So what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats facing U.S. processors, including commercial and small or niche scale mills? And Ben, I'll start with you.
And there's a myriad of strengths, probably more weaknesses than strengths, I would say, in the manufacturing sector. Two to highlight, I was thinking, getting the questions was, small scale like cottage mills. I think we underestimate as an industry the grassroots effort that those small cottage mills, and there's like 130 or so in the U.S. right now. And they are working, it's farmers markets, it's very local. And I think from an industry, they have the ability to reach a lot of consumers with knowledge, education. It's not going to be large scale processing, but there's a strength there that we have as an industry for these small cottage mills that are out there every day, working in the industry. And I think one of the biggest weaknesses we currently face is lack of skill set. And especially with more and more large scale facilities shutting down, there's going to be a massive knowledge and skill gap growing in the U.S., and we don't have a really way to build that skill back up very easily. And so I think that's kind of the two biggest strengths and weaknesses that I see.
Yeah, so I think thinking about strengths of the U.S. manufacturers, I think one of the biggest strengths that U.S. manufacturers have is how close they are to the end consumer. I mean, the United States consumer is the coveted consumer across the world. So the biggest consumer base, we have the most money. So these American manufacturers have the privilege of being neighbors with their end consumer. So there's a lot of companies that are making stuff overseas, based remotely. So they're always trying to gauge what the market's doing. Manufacturing in the United States, you got kind of a pulse on the consumer right there. And I think that's something that we at Duckworth try to remind ourselves is we are making something for the customer. What does the customer want? What are the customers responding to? So we keep a very close pulse on that. But then, kind of like what Ben was saying, weakness is labor and skill sets. So in terms of labor, the American wage rates are high, very, very high compared to other countries. So we're paying a very high wage. We're not getting the same skill set that some of those other countries and other factories overseas are getting. And some of that kind of industrial knowledge has been lost. Education is definitely a big factor there. So, we've got older machines, and last time I tallied it up, we're in about over 30 factories across 70 states. And a few of those factories, you'll go in there and there'll be a 70 or 80-year-old guy that's been there his whole life, and he knows everything inside and out about that factory, but we're losing those guys. And finding young people to fill those roles is definitely a really big challenge.
Yeah, I would agree with Evan and Ben both on that. When you think about the people that are out there right now to fill those positions, they're just not out there right now, and they're not going to. A lot of those are families that are coming in there. So a father worked there, a son worked there, the mother worked there, and as those people start to die off, that next tradition isn't coming in. Going forward. Another thing that I think that is upgrading machinery, and I think that the capital to upgrade the machinery on the coast, because it's basically starting new right now. Because you can't go overseas per se and buy a big scouring train that's capable of running the next day. And Ben realizes that from him putting together his. He started from scratch and put it together, but you've got a small scale like that, but going to a big scale commercial type machine it's crazy to get those type of numbers out there to be able to.
With the size of the follow-up on that, with the size of the industry, we're kind of hopefully building some capacity. And do you think there's opportunity for more medium scale kind of bins type size on a regional basis? Are we going back? We're trying to bring everything back from China. We're doing more friendshoring, doing more processing in Mexico now. What do you guys see as far as the landscape? If we keep building capacity, are we going to go to the very big, very efficient large scale, or are we going to try and keep it more local with local labor and the family oriented type deal? If I can't I can't bring my kid into this to learn how to run all this, and maybe that's how we expand, as we start bringing the next generation in.
I think we lack as an industry the mid-size commercial market. I'd say, Mountain Metal, well, we're small scale, not even mid-size. The mid-size industry, I think, would be more versatile and can adapt to changing conditions, and maybe more innovative. The large scale facilities are at a point where, Evan mentioned like labor shortages. They've got to start automating, and you're looking at massive facilities that have lots of high-tech equipment. So then you're looking at it's not an entry-level job. So you're 30, 40 years ago, you're fresh out of high school, your entry-level job, you're on the production floor of a big textile factory. Now you're going to be graduating with a technical degree to go run the robotic machine to get to lower that labor cost to try and keep teams running. And I think that shift, once you automate it, there's usually, you're automating for a specific product. There's less ability for those really large facilities to adapt and change the market conditions. So I think there's an opportunity in the industry for, mid-sized, adaptable, processing. The challenge there is the opportunity. I guess there's a void of it, but I don't know if there's a demand for it currently in the U.S. And you look at the large mills are still struggling. And so there's just the demand, I think, is trying to catch up.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting dynamics at play. So there's a lot of the manufacturing is, like we say, old. We're talking like 50s, 60s, 70s, back in the days when there was malls and big box stores. So you're talking giant stores placing giant orders, and essentially those chains of stores are dictating what apparel goes into the masses. You got your JCPenney, whatever they buy, that's a big influence on the market. So to fulfill that, the way that the supply chain kind of trickles down is you have those big factories cranking out a ton of the same product because that's what the orders are. That kind of industry has gone overseas. So we're kind of dealing with the remnants of that. And so you see a lot of big factories with a lot of machinery that was set up to run high volume, low margin. And that's no longer a viable business option. So I think kind of like that's why the smaller mills are having a lot of success, because entrepreneurs have a low barrier of entry to be able to start making a product and sell something. But like Ben was saying, the medium-sized mills are hard to find and don't exist. So there's no kind of medium-sized option with a capability to bring a product to market. You're kind of forced into like what Duckworth had to do, is go into these big mills that are designed for big volume, try to negotiate smaller orders to get started and build them up. So those factories are slowly trying to convert their business model, their machinery and training into running smaller batches, more unique batches, more custom products to serve more customers.
Yeah, I'm with you guys actually on that too. I think there's definitely a need, whether or not there's the volume to do it for the niche market. We were the same way. You had to start out small. When we started out, we took 2,500 pounds. I took it over to Ben, scoured it for us, and made top. And then we had the other issues. So then we want to superwash this. So now we got to figure out how we're going to get Ben's smaller mill to go through the superwash machine out of the big mill. So Ben flies out there and all works out, and we got it all the way through, and then we moved on. But there's definitely, I think there's a huge market. And definitely in those smaller mills, if someone wants to try something, you have to start out small. You can't just start out huge. Like, we needed 2,000 pounds to figure out if we're going to like a product first. So before all of a sudden, so a minimum order, like if you're going to go scour wool, a minimum scouring on a big one is about 25,000 pounds. So 25 to 50,000 pounds you're going to scour at one time. That's a lot of capital to put out there all at once. And you don't even know if the product's going to match what you think it's going to match. You have something in your mind, but you don't know if it's going to do. So I think that there's always going to be that niche market for those smaller mills. Absolutely. And I mean, non-metal is a good example. Like, you guys are doing all the time. It obviously works. I mean, you have demand because people want that. So I think it's perfect that way.
We touched a little bit on, we talked about robotics, we talked about maybe some of the bigger mills trying to do more custom type stuff. And so what do you guys see? What other trends in wool clothing manufacturing are you seeing? You know, in terms of fashion, a lot of times in the wool industry, we talk about synthetic stuff we're importing. The synthetic stuff we're importing is all fast fashion. You know, it's here today, gone tomorrow, throw it in the landfill next year, and it becomes an environmental contaminant where wool tends to be a little more of a long fashion type product, a lot of durability. You know, in terms of those type of trends, I don't want to get into like marketing stuff, but how does that impact? Evan talked a little bit about it in terms of being nimble. So is it more automation? Is it more adaptable machinery that can perform multiple functions, or how do you see that trend going in the future?
I think a telling point to that question would be Woolrich shutting down. So a few years ago, Woolrich shut down. Post and Clark, they were at one point, I think it was 1912, they were the largest company in the world globally, Post and Clark. They still make a lot of sewing threads, you know, so you might use the thread. But they sold their North American craft yarn division, I think in 2019. And the company that bought it doesn't want to do any manufacturing in the U.S., so they're shutting down all the North American facilities over the last 2 years. You have Woolworth shutting down, National Spending closed in January, they shut their doors on the spending side. And so you just look at the apparel industry, or, you know, the wool consumption side of the industry isn't matching the manufacturing. And so it was a shock to me, right? In my mind, like, hey, COVID hits, US made, there's this big push for USA made clothing, why in the world is Woolworth shutting down? And just, I think they weren't able to adapt to the change in consumer demand, or the demand was changing too fast for these larger manufacturers to adapt to it. So I guess on that end, I see it from the manufacturing side, that things are changing too fast for the manufacturing to keep up with, I guess, from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting trends going on. Ben rattled off a couple factories that shut down that I didn't know about, and there's some that I could list that he hasn't listed. So factory after factory is shutting down. There's even one Carolina Cotton Works that has some pretty high tech machinery that just stopped manufacturing, and shut it down for now. So, you know, there's definitely some challenges in the industry. I'm seeing a lot of adapter dye across the industry right now. That's a big thing. So trends are changing. You know, a lot of the old fashioned like wool sweaters, like old fashioned knits, people aren't wearing those anymore. Sport coats, that kind of stuff, and heavy wovens. People just aren't wearing those products anymore, and that was traditionally a big wool consumer, or those products were consuming a lot of wool. Nowadays, wool is really moving into sport. So it's moving into outdoors, it's moving into sport, it's moving into athletics. And the trends that we're seeing is, I guess one of the biggest trends is health focus. There's the younger generations now are very health focused. They're very concerned about health, their reproductive health. So there's a lot of talk about phthalates and PFAs, and all the chemicals that come with these plastic made garments. So right now there is a lot of demand for naturally made products, and that's a big one. I mean, if you can listen to some of the political discord right now. RFK Jr. is very, very popular because he's talking about these health issues and these unnatural products we're leaving against our skin. So I think that's a trend that still has legs. I think that one's going to go a little bit longer. So that's something that we're seeing and keeping an eye on. And it's actually hard to make wool products without incorporating some of those synthetics. So a lot of the more natural products are less refined, and there's a lot of development work on that side to get them to the market, especially in the United States. Some, like for example, hemp. I did a lot of research on hemp, making some hemp yarns, and you can get it out of China because they have some pretty harsh processes to make it into a yarn that's fine enough to be soft. But here in the United States, there's a lot of investment, but it's not there yet. So I think that's another fiber you can see coming online very soon that could potentially blend well with wool.
Yeah, the optimistic side of that thing is people love it. They really do. Once, if they're not already wearing it, if you can get it on them, they love it instantly. And Brent referred to us setting up at the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, but we did a full week there, and then we turned around on the Wednesday and went to another bar outside in South Dakota Sheep Growers, bought 100 pairs of socks from them, and we just gave them away. We made every single one of those people put them on as they sat there. All week long, those people from the other bar would come back to my booth at another bar and want to buy, like instantly. Or they walk by and like, oh my gosh, these are the best things ever. So getting wool on these people is the thing. And once they have it, they love it. It's a product that's it's outlasted us, and it's been there since the beginning of time, and it's a proven fiber, you know. So I think that's the optimistic side of that question, actually.
Yep, got emphasis on next to skin now, for hiking, biking, and all of that stuff, so. So we've talked a little bit about the issues facing kind of our bigger scale, you know, the large processors. So what do you guys, what would it take them to be? We touched on it a little bit, but the question that people were asking was, how do you support those large scale processors? What did, you know, from the demand you guys are seeing at your level, like what changes could they make that would make them a little more nimble or make them easier to work with? How do you support those last remaining large scale processors that are still willing to do business in these roles?
I think if you're trying to get them a value added wool process, being flexible with time. I think from a manufacturing, you look at say Chargeurs, wool scouring, they need to plan out 12 to 18 months. They've got to have that person employed today, and maybe employ them tomorrow, maybe employ them in January. And so the time frame for the process is 12 to 18 months for getting a product online. And that's usually once you've decided I want to make a product. And okay, I've got the wool, I want to start the process, and waiting 12 to 18 months for the product I can sell it, there's a huge gap there for financing. If you look at what are creative ways of financing, it's a big challenge. I'm sure, these guys have faced that substantially. But I think being willing to work with the manufacturers, scheduling, and there's reasons for that 12 to 18 month time frame, and usually it's just scheduling out, being busy for the whole calendar year. So that'd be kind of my biggest encouragement is accommodating that.
Yeah, I'm just racking my brain trying to figure out what those big factories can do. It's definitely a very difficult business to be in. If you've got a bunch of machines and a bunch of people, you got to keep them busy. So there's finding that business. I honestly think this does kind of come back to politics, where we're importing very, very cheap clothing, and we're getting a lot of, it's not just clothing, it's everything across the board. We're importing it cheaper than we can make it here. And so when it comes down to it, our politicians are going to have to come to terms with the fact that we're more expensive to produce here, but we do have to have some sort of national security in terms of being able to make our own products. So it's really going to come down to that. Our costs are inflated here. The whole economy is inflated relative to everywhere else. People don't need to work here. There's just more wealth. So if we're going to have manufacturing in the United States, we're going to have to put tariffs on stuff we bring in.
Yeah, I agree. That's it's the honest truth, and that's what it comes down to is that it's a money. It's really a money issue, and it comes. We boil into it, and for me personally, and actually with even with Duckworth, John and I were talking about last night, it becomes just SKUs for us. So you're putting up so many different products out there that, and then you're trying to come up with capital for all these different products, but then you have to do a minimum order. like Evan was referring to earlier, is negotiating that minimum order down, and all of a sudden, you know, I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. Like all of a sudden, there's 20,000 pairs of socks in my house. I'm like, holy cow, how am I gonna, you know, how am I gonna keep going? And then all of a sudden, somebody's like, hey, why don't you do this color instead? Why don't you do this color? And it's the same way. I'm sure it's the same situation you guys have. It comes down to a capital issue. But those large scale, those commercial plants that are doing it, like Evan said, they have to have people employed. Got to keep them going. And I understand why the minimum orders. It's just tougher on the smaller guys. You know?
I guess something I could add to that is some of the factories that we have done the most business with have been the most receptive to quick turnaround times. So there's a couple factories where we'll place an order and they'll just turn it around quick, or they'll have a lot of different options that we can change the product with, or we can develop really quickly. Those factories where we can develop quickly, bring a product to market quickly with a low investment, we sell it quicker, so we restock it quicker, so we build the program quicker. So the whole entire, that whole product line just goes. It just gets into the program and it builds over the years and it accelerates. And the big ones where we're doing big orders and we gotta make adjustments and it takes a long time to get it, those programs are having a hard time getting off the ground because it's so inconsistent and it's so slow to move. But that quick and nimble production allows for it's very profitable for a brand.
So looking at the wool clothing, the U.S. wool clothing industry over the next 5 to 10 years, I think that's one of the things you guys have identified is it needs to be not maybe fast fashion. We need to basically try to speed the supply chain up a little bit. What do you guys see over the next 5 to 10 years with the U.S. industry? I mean, it's hard to predict. Who predicted COVID and everything that brought? You know, but we know we're going to have more black swan events like that. So you see that continuation of next to skin, of sportswear, athletic wear. Do you see any of that gaining traction? I mean, is the industry just going to keep growing slowly, or is all of a sudden USA Today is going to have an article on microplastics and like everybody just completely converts to wool, and wool goes to $10 a pound grease, and everybody in the room is cheering and buying drinks for everybody at the bar? Or what do you guys see for the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, so like throwing the dartboard. You know, for mountain metal wool, our goal in 5 to 10 years is to be about 4 or 5 times bigger, and try and meet our, you know, go from really small scale to kind of in the mid scale range, but probably on the lower tier, just because we have to. It's more of a necessity for our sustainability to stay viable, and it goes to the skill sets of it. So Evan mentioned that, you know, 70-year-olds working in factories, and that's a very, like, they're probably the expert at that machine, and they've been doing it for 30, 40 years. I see us as we're building, you know, a small textile mill, I have to be able to train somebody underneath the next, you know, someone who's got 10 years experience, there has to be somebody working under them day one, so in 10 years, they're the expert. So we feel like, you know, 4 or 5 times bigger than we are gives us, you know, there's an assistant in every different job, but that can be learned in trade. The large industry, everywhere I go, it's the same way. In these larger facilities, the experts are few and far between. They've been off and running the same thing for day after day for years and years and years. Sometimes they don't even have the internal expertise anymore to really adapt that process. And I'll use an example. I like Chargers. They're great. I mean, I've gone there several times, but in their factory floor for their combing plant, I was out there, I had a technical question, and they couldn't answer the technical question of the combing plant because they operate this way, this time, you know, a certain ingredient patch. They had lost over, I don't know how many years, the expert who knew, oh, this is how I adapt that machine to deal with this problem. And that's going to get worse over the next, you know, 5, 10 years. You've got those 60-year-olds who are in the plant, they're the technical expert, they're going to keep retiring, and I don't know where that new source is coming through. You look at a dwindling industry, and we've been dwindling for what, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, wool textiles in the U.S. has been dwindling. In a dwindling economy and dwindling industry, you're not hiring the extra person to be the assistant to grow that expertise. You're just survival mode. And I think that's the large scale processes are in survival mode. ranchers are in survival mode, small scale production, it's all kind of survival mode in our current economy. And so innovation, Evan mentioned, the fast turnaround time, when we look at that 12 to 18 month turnaround as being standard, well, maybe there is that innovative new 3 to 6 month turnaround that maybe there is that innovation that exists in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think there's two thoughts going through my mind. So in terms of technology, there's some pretty cool 3D knitting out there now. So there's a couple brands, or I guess companies you could call them, where you can essentially sign up as a brand. They will develop the products for you, or they have a pre-developed product. We're talking like basic t-shirts, not like what you would think, like more like knits, so hoodies, sweaters, and you can essentially pick your styles, make your catalog, and if a customer buys off your website, that order will go straight there. They'll put the yarn on the machine, 3D knit it, and it will come out basically finished. There's very, very little finish work. They'll package it and ship it directly to the customer for you. That's real. That's happening today. The technology is pretty good. So it's pretty limited in what you can make, but give it 5-10 years and it might be able to make some pretty good things. Now, what's interesting about this is it skips a lot of steps. So you're essentially taking dyed yarn and then you're putting it on a machine and a garment comes out. The steps we're doing now is we're taking undyed yarn, knitting it, then dyeing it, then cutting it, and then sewing it, and then you get a finished garment. So there's 4 factories in between that it has to go, that you're cutting out with that 3D knitting. So I think there's some opportunity there, especially if that technology gets a little more refined and you can make styles that are less fashion oriented and more function oriented. But then the other thought I have is the COVID years were a blur. We had probably triple the amount of demand versus the amount of product we could make. We couldn't make enough product. We were just slammed, making as much as we possibly could. And that has come to a screeching halt in 2024. So the whole economy is down. So it's kind of like a 4-year party and now it's stopped. If the American economy does get another boom, the apparel industry will go with it because if there's a lot of consumers that have a lot of money, they're going to buy clothing and they're going to have that discretionary income for wool clothing, which is typically higher end.
Yeah, 5 to 10 years, that's kind of like Vince said, it's like throwing a dart at the wall, but it's the truth though. I think that minus another COVID event, minus the maybe the infrastructure of the United States growing, if all that would happen, then I think we'd be away.
We talked a little bit about consumer demand and preferences in wool product. One of the things that comes into that is what are you guys seeing in terms of we talked a lot about this in Australia at a couple of different operations because they are so heavily dependent on exports, but our consumers are here. So do you have consumers on the wool side asking you about quality assurance, animal care? Do you see that as any those assurance programs? There's quite a few of them out there. I guess how do you guys address that from a consumer standpoint? I don't know, Ben, I don't know how it really relates into custom orders, but maybe you get feedback from people that are bringing wool in, and I think we do a pretty good job. Most of the people that are doing business with you guys are pretty progressive and pretty knowledgeable about that stuff, and so just maybe some general comments on those certification deal. My big deal has always been, when I send you wool, I just want my wool back, because I know I'm doing a good job raising it and taking care of the animals, but what kind of comments do you guys have on that?
I'd say, animal welfare, it's not necessarily an interest, it's an expectation at this point. And I'd say just that's the general expectation is that you're going to be sourcing wool from somewhere, assuring the customer, I think, building customer confidence in that. I think there's, a lot of work maybe to be done in that. But for most of our customers coming in, it's usually the expectation is that that wall has been, animals been taken care of, the land's been taken care of. And we do, as part of our branding, we need to try and, showcase that this is the story behind it. But branding can always be misleading too in terms of, so I don't know how it differentiates itself from the big brands, the Patagonias and sorts that are also branding that story. But yeah, I'd say it's an expectation by the people.
Yeah, I think it's not really an issue for us. I think we might get one animal welfare question a year, and so to us, it's not really something I don't think customers are really thinking about that much anymore.
I agree. I've got like one or two questions on animal welfare for the last 7 years, probably. To me, it's not a big issue. Something that, but in all fairness, when you look at some of the Facebook posts that Duckworth does or that we do, we're showing out there. We're showing that we're stewards of the land already. You know what I mean? So we're already pushing that agenda without a self-certification saying that we're pushing that agenda because we're proving it, we're showing it, and I think that's something, and my hat's off to Duckworth because that's something that they do constantly. There's always, when I go through my Facebook, I'm always getting a feed from them out there about what's going on at the ranch and how the product's made and how the sheep are taken care of and how they're coming off the grass. That does a lot just for saying itself right there. And I think a self-certification to me isn't valuable, but I definitely think animal welfare is important. And I want to show that it is happening. We are doing it also.
How important is social media and that type of deal? It just seems like our world kind of changed with COVID, where everybody was locked in terms of marketing, in terms of telling your story, developing a brand. How important is the brand? And is the brand you develop with your product, with your company? Is it, as Ben said, so now it's an expectation that, so is all that kind of tied into one, and how does social media play into that?
I don't know, not that I'm also the best brand expert in the world. We're still learning every day. But I would say a huge part, like what differentiates us from a big, the massive, large commercial commodity industry, and it's the brands, the story. And the challenging part is social media. There's just so much out there, at least we feel like on our end. You can have a really authentic story, and some other company, they go out and they remember driving by and they see a sheep and they take a picture of it and they post it and they post it really well. And like, hey, they can show that they're doing something on the land, but they might have, the story is actually very inauthentic. And so selling an authentic story, I feel like is a challenge on social media to get, this is the real deal versus, and you've got the real deal here sitting here. But I thought that's a hard part.
Yeah, social media and just I guess online marketing in general is an ever-changing thing. In the 2019 through 2023 years, it was a wild west. It was actually pretty crazy. There were not a lot of rules on Facebook. There's not a lot of rules on Google, and you could pretty much buy whatever type of customer you wanted. We have companies that we pay to keep track of all the data for us, and you can basically calculate how much sales you're going to get per dollar you invest in. It's an investment thing, so you just feed the machine, and it's kind of like gambling almost. It comes and goes though. As the different what do you call them, websites like Facebook, Meta now. When they change their algorithms, everything changes, and it's kind of a race to figure out who can kind of crack it and what the different ways that it works are. So, I guess in essence, it's really just fishing for us. So we're trying to reach new customers, and so we are building ads. We do multiple ads and do machine learning to figure out which one's going to work best, and then push those ads. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes you don't really realize. But it really is just kind of the customer base that you can engage. So we essentially use that for finding customers. It's basically customer acquisition, that along with Google. Some of the other platforms are a little more difficult to crack into. We're working now to try to see what we can do on X, as it's kind of changing. So, it's just weird. I guess the one takeaway from social media is it's kind of like it's an expectation that you have a good social media presence because that's the face of your brand. There's no other location that people are really getting that brand voice, that brand story. So it's big Instagram. Some of the younger brands are doing TikTok. It just depends on your audience. Each different social media site has a different audience. So whether it's Facebook or Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat now. But I guess kind of lost my train of thought where I was going. But it's interesting that how they play. I guess Apple just changed some new settings where it changes the way the ads work. That was, I think, last year, and that completely upended our whole marketing program. So the online marketing world is definitely interesting. It's data driven, but it's very challenging.
Yeah, no question. It's a challenging situation trying to figure out what to do, and it's a little bit different. You know, I try to do mine basically myself, you know, and it makes it a little bit tougher, you know, when you're trying to figure out a market without the numbers. I do know one thing is every single time we put a post on of some sort, we have an order within 15 minutes. I mean, it's like clockwork. So I think it's just a matter of getting it out there for people and just reminding them that the product's there because they're looking to order anyway. And I think if you utilize it that way a little bit, and that's kind of what I've been doing, and it seems like it's been working good. Do I want to hit a bigger audience? Absolutely. Oh.
Well, we've asked you kind of now I'm going to move on to the tougher questions. So these are kind of, I don't know if you ever heard the story about putting your rock on the table when you're in the business meeting about what mistakes you've made, and if you haven't made mistakes, you can't sit at the table with the big investors. So what's your best and worst decision so far that you started your company? Best and worst decision so far?
Best decision I'd say was to diversify. So we started out just scouring, spinning yarn, having a knitting operation and then a dyeing operation, and it allows us to keep people employed throughout the whole year. So when you get full shorn, April, May, June comes in, how do I keep that person employed in January, February, March? And being diversified, we can shift people around pretty easily and cross-train. So I'd say that's, as a whole, diversifying our capabilities, but then also diversifying our market. So we do a bit of online sales, and we become our own customer that I can schedule my own orders around custom production. And that gives us this step of flexibility to put our own, if something breaks down or something, you know, a certain process down. So, okay, let's do our internal production for a couple of weeks while we're getting something figured out. So I'd say that's probably been the best decision. Worst, when COVID hit, we tried to help out more producers. We bought a lot more wool than we normally consume. And it's a good and bad decision. We sent it to Chargeurs, got it processed into comb top. So we brought in a ton of comb top, and it allowed us to expand our spinning operation while we didn't have to worry about our scouring operation. It took about 18 months, almost 24 months to get the first load back. So then the next time around, we're like, well, we better plan ahead. If we're going to grow our spinning operation, let's send more wool earlier on. Well, then Chargeurs got back up in the production, and so then they processed. So last year they processed one full load of ours in July and the next full load in November. So within 3-4 months, we got 2 full years of flip back. So we're sitting on tons of inventory. And so I'd say a worst decision is I'm not the best finance person in the world for business finance, and the cost of inventory is substantial in maintaining that. And so I'd say business finance is probably a weak spot on my end, and not valuing that decision earlier on. Like, okay, what's the smart business finance point? You know, production, no, okay, we have plenty of wool. We can run those spinners all day long, but not understanding the cost of that inventory is probably.
Yeah, I'm still trying to think of the worst decision I've ever made. I'm kind of coming up with a.
Your best is Mary and Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was number one.
obviously was number one, so everything else is number two. But, one of the best decisions we ever made at Duckworth is we were, like a classic brand where you have wholesale business, which means selling to stores, and direct-to-consumer business, which is your online website. When COVID hit, we decided, we'd been talking about it for a long time, but we decided whole hog, cut wholesale and go online only. That was the best decision we ever made. Before that, it feels like we were a square peg with a round hole. Things just weren't, the cogs just weren't joining. It just wasn't working right. And doing that, everything started to flow really well. We got quicker turnover of product. We got better margins. We got directly to the consumer what they were asking for. So that was the best decision that Duckworth made in general. Man, I'm trying to think of kind of where we did wrong. I think probably it's kind of not really a decision, but it's a lack of a decision that has hurt us in the past was not really investing in solid design at the early stages with good professionals so that we build a solid foundation on our product line. So there's kind of when you don't have a good foundation on the structure of like your fit and your patterns, those things creep up through the years, and then you have to make adjustments through the years, which is very difficult. So we've kind of worked hard over the last couple of years to fix sizing and fit, that kind of stuff. That's hard because it all depends on who your customer is. People are all different shapes. So standardizing that, getting professional input on that's been really good. So I wish I would have done that sooner.
Worst decision, it's kind of a catch-22 because I think our worst decision was only starting with 2,000 pounds of top or 2,000 pounds of wool and trying it that way because we grew too fast. We grew faster than we could possibly get more wool produced down the chain, which cost us, it cost us 3 years of production basically, and we just ran out of our large crews. We ran out of product for 2.5 years. Like it was crazy. So then we just kind of downscaled back a little bit. We didn't advertise as much, or if we did advertise, we weren't advertising large crews. We were advertising large quarters, and I think that's it's a super bad thing to have happen, but it ended up working, and now that I think that we can foresee the future, we're past that point now. Now we've got enough top and yarn on hand now. But every time I take yarn or whatever, we go ahead, or every time we knit yarn, we go ahead and spin more at the same time because just so we don't get ourselves in that kind of predicament. So like I said, it's both. I guess it's probably the best and worst. Probably the number one best thing we did is listening to customers and we added some different lines. Like we added a no-show sock, and that thing is crazy. Like I never would have guessed that would have been one of our most popular socks, but it's our number 2 seller. We've only had it 3 months, and it's been our number 2 seller, right behind large crews, which we've been out of, for that long, and those people are trying to stock up because of that. So I think that was one of the greatest things we did was actually add it and just listening to what the consumer wanted.
It sounds like don't run out of wool and don't get too much wool.
Get too much.
Probably sums up the supply chain issue about as much as anything.
But it really just comes down to capital, Brent, though. And that is that's another thing that was tough for me is not having enough capital when I needed it. But just like Ben's not going to regret that wool setting there, because in a year from now when he needs it and the supply chain he can't get any more, except unless he runs it himself, he's not going to regret it. You know what I mean? And that's how we're setting now too with what, I don't have 60,000 pounds, but I do have 20,000 pounds of top set. So I'm happy with that though.
We're coming up right on an hour here. Does the audience have any questions? Do you guys have anything you wanna know about? specifically? I've got more hard questions for him. I can keep going, but I want to give you guys a Randy.
Trying to have a big quantity wise, how much finite, much more do you guys have that
So the question was, when these guys were starting out, if they were sending a smaller lot to one of the larger mills, sending less wool than what would normally be run commercially, how much extra did that cost? What kind of efficiency, inefficiency cost did they have in that type of system? I don't know, Ben, you run anywhere from, I don't know that you're running single fleeces anymore, but you run some pretty small lots up to some pretty decent sized lots. Maybe you can talk about, everybody can talk about that kind of economies of scale, because I think really that's what Randy's looking at is what are the cost differences in economies of scale, because that's pretty much every business that they talk about.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much they give us surcharge areas, but I know internally, the cost for us to ship it from Wyoming out there, get it processed and shipped back, it's less than half the cost of us doing it internally. And so for us, it's like, I'll pay whatever premium. I'm sure they're charging us more, but it was worth it for us. It's half the internal cost of doing it. Just everything in the scale wise that they're doing is so much more efficient. And that's extra shipping and transportation and handling. But that's for us, it was worth it to do that.
Yeah, I think, for us, the negotiated lower minimum wasn't really at the raw wool stage. We kind of accommodated what they could do. So I don't think we got a surcharge there, but what I was talking about in terms of, negotiating smaller lots was especially in like dyeing. That's the big one. So, most dye machines, the common ones are like 1,000-pound dye machine, but they have sample machines that are a couple 100 pounds. So if you're going to dye in a couple 100-pound machine, say a 200-pound machine, they might charge you like a 50% surcharge on top of that. So that's what you're going to pay there. Then you go up the chain and you go to sewing garments. If you're going to be sewing garments at sample rates, what they call it, salesman samples or photo samples, they typically charge 3x. So whatever your efficient rate is, if you want to sample, it's 3 times. So that's where it really adds up.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think as far as chargers goes, I don't think they, to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure that I just piggybacked off Duckworth and Helle's, because they charged about the same rate. I mean, it was pretty close. But definitely, the difference from going from a small scale to that was, Ben's right, it's about half the cost. So, which is worth it, So I don't think that they're doing that part good. I think when you get to the finishing though, I think that's when it, like Gavin said, that's when the price starts going up, when you start figuring how much it's going to be per pair, I guess for me, it seems like they sell them cheaper than sometimes than what they're charging us to make them or whatever, and not paying for any yarn. But, yeah, I think that's where it comes into play a lot.
Any other questions real quick?
Artificial intelligence, how does that?
I did my first Facebook post picture with artificial intelligence for this, I asked for this deal. I thought it turned out pretty well. So I don't know, we'll ask these guys. You guys using any AI for design or software packages or anything like that?
As much as I hate AI, I also love it. And I think it has the potential to be a really great tool. One would be, Evan mentioned doing like made to order on 3D knitting machines. The whole process for doing that, AI can collect data so fast and process it so fast it's going to transform, even pattern makers. I was looking at someone, you can go and, AI will generate, so when we do the software for programming a knitting machine, they now have companies that you can go and, the AI will help program that for you and you just put it in your machine. So I think it's in the cusp of transforming a lot of textiles. We're looking internally, we've been spending, years on inventory management, workflow management, and the big software companies, they're big, they're clunky, and the textile industry is so small, there's nothing specific to textile processing in terms of their workflow software. So we can adapt it. Well, with AI, we can probably create our own workflow software a lot faster and cheaper than we could. So I think those are just a couple examples of it transforming the industry.
Yeah, I think some of our designers have used AI, so there's some stuff you can do with photos with AI. So I think it's things that you could do before, but it's just made it easier. For example, I think there was a picture of me out on the ranch, and I was looking, I was like, how do I have a gun on my back in that picture, and it's gone. So they're able to make me look less scary. So things like that. But I think for other production stuff, I don't think I've really used any of those AI tools. I saw our planning software claims to have some sort of AI stuff. I don't know if I think it'll be that helpful. I guess where I've personally used it in business, where I thought it was helpful, is for legal things. It's good for drafting up agreements and documents, things like that, really quickly, and not to involve a lawyer and trust it. So.
Yeah, I agree with that as far as the documentation stuff goes for AI. I think a huge one that a lot of people don't know is Meridian, especially yarns, put in a huge dye plan. So like $12 million, I think they invested into that plan, and it's all automated. Everything's automated. So their percent of redyes, I mean, they go weeks with 0 redyes, and it's like 0.1%. It's crazy the amount of capacity that they're able to do. And like Evan said, with different machines, so they put all different sorts of tubs in, so they can go from 200 pounds to 500 pounds to thousands to 2000s. I mean, it's pretty neat. And then plus top dye on top of that. So, I think as far as AI goes, I think that's probably the most advanced that we've seen as of yet. I mean, other than like that knitting machine or spinning machine that'll do everything from start to finish.
Any other burning questions real quick? I got more hard ones for them, so. Well, we'll get back to the hard ones. So, what's the hardest issue you have to solve developing your business?
It's general technical knowledge. You look at it, every 4-year university in the U.S. has shut down their wool processing capabilities. The last one was the University of Wyoming, it was early 2000s. So just the knowledge of wool processing in the U.S. it's hard to build that skill set. So lots of on-the-job learning. Learning curve is pretty steep. Lots of mistakes and adapting and changing. I'd say that's probably, building a technical skill set in order to get from scoured product all the way to knit product. I think that's probably the biggest challenge. And therefore, we haven't overcome it yet. So your question was which one we've overcome. We're still learning every day.
Yeah, I got the same thing. My biggest problem, I still have not overcome it yet. So the biggest challenge with manufacturing wool fabrics in the United States is all the machinery is designed for synthetics. What America makes in the vast majority is synthetics. It's cotton, poly-cotton, and then all sorts of different synthetics that are involved in like protective, automotive, those types of things. So think like your construction orange vest, that kind of stuff. Those synthetic fabrics, that orange construction vest or fire retardant fabrics for firefighters, they rip it through those machines at high speeds, and it doesn't bother that fabric. So when you put wool in a machine that rips it through, it can wreck the wool really quickly. So our biggest challenge is taking some of those same machines and slowing the process down, making sure that it's gentle on the wool because it's a natural fiber and it can get felted, it can get filled. So essentially it all comes down to consistency and shrinkage control. We actually have shrinkage control in terms of washing under control, but it's the smaller things in between that are definitely difficult. So it's really just consistency and careful manufacturing, which is really hard because the machines aren't made for that. They're not made for wool. So that's our biggest challenge.
I'm not gonna lie, I think my biggest challenge is probably capital, to be honest. And when you're going into a financial situation or into a bank and trying to borrow money on a product that isn't out, it's not super easy. I know. I mean, you have to get it. I think the last big loan that I got, we actually had to get, documentation from South Carolina, from North Carolina, Tennessee, and South Dakota because it's coming back. You know, so I mean, it's I think capital is definitely the hardest for us.
One of the things that's always a challenge is trying to keep, shearers and wool handlers and producers excited about wool quality on the shearing floor and contamination. We've got lots of literature out there about everything from the processing side. What do you guys see as the biggest contaminant? Well, I mean, what are the big ones that you guys deal with that really just don't pull your hair out over when they come on the board?
I'd say, not necessarily contaminant, but length and strength issues across the board. Someone will call and I want my wool maybe to that sweater to sell. And it comes in and it's a strength issue or a length issue, and those are really hard over the phone. Like, how is your wool strong? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's great wool. And it comes in and it's a process. And you can't really, if it's poor wool going in, poor wool garments going out, there's nothing to do magic to fix that. But I'd say there's a lot of variability with length and strength across the board.
Yeah, if any of you guys have talked wool prices with your local wool buyer, you're familiar with 80% of Australian prices and that terminology. So there's Australian wool prices, and then American is 80% of that. And the reason that's a standard is because of quality issues that are just predictable across the board. And a large majority of those quality issues is length and strength that I'm seeing. Good length, good strength is mandatory for making a good yarn. Once you have a good yarn, if it has contamination, then that's another problem. But it's very difficult to make good yarns without wool that's long enough and strong enough. So it's really good. It's really important that it's put up right and shorn well. It's skirted and it's clean, free of black fibers, free of white fibers. But honestly, you can't starve your sheep in the winter. You got to have like very good nutrition, solid nutrition all the way through. All it takes is one really bad storm and it can break the wool, and a break in the middle of the wool will break in the yarn stage, and then you have short fibers. Short fibers means pilling, it means weakness. So that's our biggest problem, is just long, consistent, strong wool.
I think my biggest problem actually is who scours in front of them. Are they crossbreds? Because we do a really super good job of overskirting. And, I mean, out of our own product, and I know you guys do too, but I've actually had more black fibers show up in our natural yarns or whatever, just because of who scoured in front of me, and just when we started out with Ben, we didn't have any problem. Those socks came back bright white, zero fibers. Well, you know what I mean? Because you completely cleaned out the machine, right? Before we did it. And I think that the big commercial guys aren't getting as good clean out. And I think we're following those fibers because there's so much left, I mean, they're doing their best, but I think that that's a contamination issue in itself. And yet we've been constantly hammering the farmers and ranchers about taking care of their wool, real full skirt, get all your black fibers out, shear your black sheep last. I mean, I've been preaching this for, 30 years. So it's just been one of those things that we haven't been able to keep a grasp on. But then all of a sudden we get to the production side, and all that hard work we did at the grease raw wool level just got lost over that little bit. So I think that's been our big contamination issue.
What's the best advice you've been given That's business advice. We'll stick with that. We won't go with life advice. We'll be here all day. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was a really cool slogan I had in my mind, and, you know, honestly, it goes back to, foundation part of society, and it was prayer. And I can't tell you every day, like, there are so many problems, there are ranchers who guys face it. I love being in the wool industry, let's just put it that way. Wool industry, you can still go, and that's a fundamental value in the wool industry. The rest of society doesn't really have that. But I would say there is every day where it's like, I don't think I could get through the challenges without some grounding, you know, philosophy of life that gets me through it. And so I think that's where, you know, every challenge, machine breaking, customer, there's always something. But without some grassroots foundation, I don't think we can get through it.
Yeah, I think, one of the most important things is, I can't remember who told me it or where I got it from, but somebody's told me that everything in business is all about the people. And it really is true. So it's easy to think about your problems in terms of the broken machine. You're waiting for parts, you're waiting for this or that, or, you know, project basis things. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, there's the human element that is always there, and it's always seems to be the most important. So to me, just getting in touch with people and face to face, talking to people, trying to figure out what they're doing, what they're dealing with, what I want. It just good communication, and it comes down to the human element, and that seems to solve the most problem.
So when I was 23, the guy I was working for, actually, 21, actually. 21, the guy I was working for in Rapid City, I was working at a pawn shop when I was in college. And he gave me the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kowski. And after reading that, my mindset just totally changed about business. I looked into it about not working, working for yourself, not working for the government, and keep pushing on, you know what I mean? And never giving up, no matter how many times it looks dreary and you go down and stuff isn't working out for you, just keep on your same focus going forward. And I've tried to base all of my businesses from the pawn shop to the ranching to our sharing business, and then in the Bishop Sox, I've tried to base it all that way, and I think that was one of and it's obviously not one single quote, that's obviously a whole book, but yeah, if you want a little pick me up in business, read that book.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've read that one twice, I think, so. Get down kind of the bottom end of the questions, and I'll ask you one more question, and then I'll have you kind of I want you guys to talk about maybe some stuff on your mind that we haven't discussed with trying to probe you with some of the questions I put together. But the final question is, what's the best advice you would give someone looking at starting a value-added wool business, other than don't do it? I'm not going to let you use that. So.
I'd say, if you have kids or you know someone with kids, it's kind of like having kids. They're very rewarding, but they cost a lot. They're always challenging. There's always new problems. Every day something different. Tons of hard work. You get your first kid's born, it's like, oh, I can do this. And another one comes, and it's like, sleepless nights. And I'd say it's kind of like having kids. You got to be ready for the hard work. But then at the end of the day, all those challenges with raising kids doesn't mean it's not worth it. So it's still, at the end of the day, it's worth it to do it. And I'd say value-added wool, it might not be the new Patagonia of the world, but it's pretty fun and rewarding to see something made with a product that you're raising it yourself, or someone else who raised it, and to see it got into a product that you can sell to the consumer is pretty fun and rewarding, and despite all the challenges.
Yeah, I'd say there's two main things. I think you've got to put the pen to the paper and do the math. You've got to really plan every single aspect out, do the math forward, do the math backwards, change variables. You really need to know what the math is behind it before you get started, to really make sure that you wrap your mind around what you're getting into. And then if you still want to do it, you got to jump in head first. You got to commit.
how I present that. I actually think, another thing that a person needs to know is you need to know the processors. You need to know them before it starts. And I was super lucky because I was sharing with John's and Tom's, Evan was a kid then, but she, at that time, and they introduced me to every one of those people in the line. So I knew them 3 years before we got started. And so we already had an in a personal relationship with those people, and it helped. And that's what made it happen the most. Because if you just go in raw and not know who you're going to talk to, I don't even know if it's possible right now if you don't have some kind of an in.
Any other burning questions from the audience real quick? You guys wrap up with a few comments and stuff that maybe.
I add the traits like she was saying, when you get to that point, unless you have to look at it in a financial situation. So just like you were saying, you have to think of finance. So if I'm going to only take a small amount of wool in, I'm going to lose a lot of profit because it's going to cost that much more to process that small amount. So then you got to look at it on your own operation. So you're wanting to start your own. So let's say you have 500 sheep, right? Great. So you've got 5,000 pounds of wool. Let's pull off another 500 pounds of that. That's probably not great. That you want to keep separate. So you've got 4,500 pounds of wool. So how many years is it going to take me to get to 25,000 pounds minimum? So now all of a sudden you're not going to get a wool check for, for quite a few years. And so you got to think of it. You got to see if the financial is going to match what you're capable of doing and what you want to do.
Yeah, and I think Dan addressed that. Oh, John, go ahead.
Say for our direct consumer, it's people who value USA made, they want to see something made in the US, they're willing to pay that premium for that. On the custom processing side, it's ranchers across the US who I've got wool and I need to make ends meet, and they're creative, like I gotta find a way to I want my next generation to have ranch to raise those sheep on. And so that they're motivated to find a way to bring value to that wool flip going through. Occasionally you get one who says, well, I couldn't get a good deal in a warehouse, or, and I just need something to do with it. And those are the dangerous ones because they usually haven't thought out the plan. They have no idea where they're going to sell it. They have no idea the full lengths of cost. They're like, I know that I raise wool and it's worth this much when I take it to a warehouse, and it's got to be worth more if it goes into the store. And so they just want to jump in and without thinking through it. But that, I'd say, the successful ones are the ones who, hey, this is my family, this is my legacy, we need to bring value to this operation, and those usually are successful projects.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a hard question to answer, and it's also a hard answer to describe. So being the one downside to being an online business is we don't get as many person-to-person interactions as we'd like. Just recently, we've started doing a bunch more in-person events, which has been good to see and interesting to see the feedback that we get there and who comes. But I think the overarching theme that joins all of our customers is they have a passion for outdoors. And so if they're going to be doing anything outdoors, they want to be comfortable and they feel safe and bold. So I think that's the overarching theme is it's outdoorsmen that are buying our stuff. There is kind of a hipster element to it where it's the fashion side, but a lot of that is in towns like Bozeman, like Kalispell, Whitefish, Boulder, it's still outdoors oriented. So that's a question we're constantly following and trying to further explore because it drives everything else in the business. It trickles all the way down through the product.
I'm not gonna lie, our easiest sellers are the people in the audience, to be honest with you. Ones that already raise will maybe have some genetics. I can look around the room and I can tell you whose genetics are already in our socks, and a lot of them are in this room. So that's our easiest sell. I don't think that's our most sales by no means. It's obviously the outdoor people. We really dipped into more of the running market, so I think that's a huge one. John and I were talking about it last night that I actually, back in the old days, I used to express my opinion a lot more on politics and things like that, but I'm finding out that I don't now because because a lot of the people that have different political views than I are the ones that are interested in that homegrown sock. You know what I mean? They want to know the story behind it, and they want to feel it, and they want to know how great these sheep are out grazing like that, and they want that, and they're willing to take that money, just like he said with the hipster element. They're willing to take that money and put it into a product that's going to last longer, and wool is that product.
It was interesting, one of the quotes they made at Lamax was one of the marketing people was, guy basically said, consumers nowadays, the old saying, probably 10, 15 years ago, they want to know what you're doing to help the environment. But nowadays, they don't want to know what you're doing, they want to know where you're going. And that's one of the main things that they're looking at. They want to see what progress are you making. That's kind of like benchmarking has gotten to be such a big deal. I like that. We should design a whole marketing program around that. People feel safe and they do. So, well, I think we're going to, we've run about an hour and a half here. I'm going to let these guys just kind of maybe talk about a few things that we didn't cover with the questions, whatever they have on their mind, whatever they want to talk about. I'll start with you.
I think that, talking to producers, primary producers in this room, there's often the question, a suppressed market is not what it was back in 2019. What are the solutions? And everyone's kind of looking for that big solution. I hear pretty regularly, like, we need to start a new first stage processing facility. And there's a lot of people looking into that. And I'm not going to say it's not an okay option, but I know the current processors are already struggling to keep production through their mills at a bit large scale. And I think it could be investigated more, but it needs to be done thoroughly and unbiasedly, like really go assess the existing capabilities in the U.S. to see, how do these existing commercial manufacturers, how do they stay in business? Because I think the last thing you want is for those large commercial mills, the few that remain, to shut down. It would be devastating. And so how can you adapt? There's probably changes to make. There's, I think, a mid-sized range, something that's very adaptable. What does that look like? I think that's where the future goes, is how do we augment what they currently do with something new? And it's going through the question of manufacturing. That was one thought that came to mind. The other would be, again, if you're thinking value added, I can't stress enough knowing your market and how to get it to that market. And I see it so often underestimated as how much that last 10%. So it's the last leg of the journey to get to the consumer. And I think that's probably the hardest leg of the journey. Manufacturing it, we know how to make it, we can do this, but getting it to the consumer, whether it's Facebook or Google or ads, farmers markets, trade shows, that last leg of the journey is often underestimated in terms of how much it takes to get it to that final consumer. And numbers wise, we probably, we're a small batch manufacturer, but we'll spend 90% of our margin on a Facebook or Google ad if we're going into some of our products. And so just thinking through that, it's like, okay, suddenly wholesale doesn't look too bad if you go to a wholesale market. But again, our margins aren't very large to begin with. So just thinking through that, it's that last leg of the journey can be very daunting.
Yeah, I think the biggest thought going through my head now is if, in terms of value added and in terms of the wool industry in general, the biggest value add you can do on your ranch to your wool is getting good genetics. I can't stress this enough. When people talk about not getting a good price for their wool, you look at that 80% of Australian value, that's because American wool varies so much. There's so many different breeds, there's so many different types of sheep, and there's so many different types of wool. You're not going to go out and use the same 80-year-old tractor to plow your field as you would today. You have a brand new tractor because it's efficient and it does a good job. It pulls a wide plow. That 80-year-old tractor pulls a 6-foot wide plow. It's the same with genetics. If you're growing wool that's really coarse, there's no market for it. And when people are talking about not getting a good price for their wool, it's because they're growing the wrong wool. So what Australia does, why they have such a good price, is it's all merino. It's all merino and all the wool looks the same. If you're a manufacturer and you're buying just wool in general, you want it to be the same every single time so that when you turn on that machine, you get the same product every single time. If you have to constantly change the machine for varying types of wool, or if you can't cobble together the right lots of wool to get that consistency, you can never pass go. So I think that's the biggest thing with the American wool industry is we have to homogenize our breeding, get it down to a few less breeds, get the wool to a similar clip of wool so that when any of these programs do get legs, there's supply behind it to actually go. I can't tell you how many military fabrics, programs, research projects I've seen where they want to make a product for the military, they develop it, and they say, can we make 50,000 of these? And everybody goes pale. There's not enough wool. Because the right wool that you need is important for those projects. And it's honestly, it doesn't have to be 18 micron. So we're talking anything less than like 22 micron is really, really good. And it doesn't even have to be finer, much finer than 19. So we're talking 20 to 22 is a very, very useful clip of wool. As long as it's long and strong, clean, 20 to 22, you can make a lot of different products with that. And I think I'm kind of preaching to the choir here because this is the Montana ram sale where we have a lot of numbers-based breeding. We're using NSIP. All the sheep here have very good wool, very similar wool. You could take this whole barn minus the suffix, shear them all, and it's pretty homogeneous clip. That's a good thing. But I don't think that's true across the United States. So for the wool industry to thrive, we have to homogenize our wool clip.
Yeah, I agree. It's obviously a little tough when we get into the winter climates, but there's not that many sheep. So I mean, obviously, if we can keep our from Texas to Canada, to California, I mean, if we can keep all that with pretty darn close to the same, I think that would belong to it there. And what a good speech during our ram sale. That was perfect. I want to go buy a Helle now. No, but it's absolutely true though, and I think it's something to think about, and is trying to make your clip the best. I mean, we obviously know that a lot of times, well, lamb price is down right now too, but that's our main driver. It's lamb, and sometimes wool gets a second burner to it. But if you're wanting to get your product out there, if you want Center of the Nation boys over there to buy it from you, or Lisa back in the corner. You know, you need to have it that way. You need to have a presentable clip for them. And I think that's exactly true.
Well, I think that's a good note to wrap up on. That was some good advice, and, these guys will stick around. I don't think, Ben, you're staying the night. You'll be here for the U sale. Everybody else, I think, will be here for the U sale. So, social starts in 2.5 hours, I think. U sale at 6 o'clock. Be sure to dig through, I've got some free handouts or stuff you can take on the far end of the table there. I was coming back through customs and they said, oh, you're bringing an extra suitcase back, that you didn't take down, wanted to clear anything. And I said, yeah, lots of books. So feel free to dig through there's pretty much every educational publication on sheep or wool that Australia has put out in the last couple of years is over on that table. So if you, don't take them, but just, if you see something that's really interesting, take a picture of it or something, but I'll leave that out over in the Ram barn tomorrow too, and people can dig through it. But there's some really interesting publications there for you guys to look at. So with that, I want to certainly thank Ben and Evan and Wade for taking time out of their busy schedule and being brave enough to get up on the stage here in front of everybody in our Hawaiian lawn chairs that Cheryl Schultz donated to us for the use today. So we appreciate Cheryl for letting us use her lawn chairs. And with that, everybody online, thanks for joining in. And I would certainly appreciate all you guys and go out there and buy some more clothing. Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Okay. You're on.